Welcome to CFTC Talks. I'm your host, Andy Bush. Hey, remember, there's an important disclaimer at the end of the show you should listen to. This week, we turn to policymaking in our nation's capital to gain a perspective on the agriculture sector and food. This will be part one of a two-part series on this subject as we have the chairman for both the Senate and the House Agricultural Committees come on the show. Joining us today is Republican Senator from Kansas, Pat Roberts. Senator Roberts has had a long career serving Kansas. First, as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from 1981 until 1997, and then as a senator from 1997 to today. Currently, he chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee. He is the first member of Congress in history to have chaired both the House Agriculture Committee and now the Senate Committee. Therefore, we are so pleased to have his deep knowledge available to come on the show to discuss the current state of agriculture. Mr. Chairman, welcome to CFTC Talks.
Andy, thank you so much. It's a privilege to be able to visit with you.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to discuss a wide range of agriculture issues today. But before we get started, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to talk to you about your career. You were a journalism major in college and a newspaper reporter and editor for several Arizona newspapers early in your career. What lessons did you take away from that experience?
Well, I think it's the typical lesson of anybody that majored journalism at that time and then was fortunate enough to work for several newspapers, the Arizona Republic, the Scottsdale Progress, and then even the Evening American. But that was only for 2 weeks. They kept writing different things under my byline, which I didn't write. That seemed to me to be a little bit tough. But it's the typical who, where, what, why, when, and how. And it's a challenging job. I had a weekly on the west side, Phoenix, but it really enabled me at a time when it was under Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he was expanding the Great Society into every corner of everything that was local and town government. This was met with mixed reactions. It was also a time out in Scottsdale where they were just really sprawling all over the place, and so I got a good close-up look at the local government perspective with regards to the federal government.
Well, and your great-grandfather founded the Oskaloosa Independent, the state's second oldest newspaper.
That is correct. The legend has it that John Wesley Roberts came from Ohio with a flatbed press and a team of oxen, a six-gun, and a Bible. And he was an abolitionist, and at one point, Mr. Quantrill rode over with the flaming torches to torch the Independent. My great-grandfather, according to family legend, went out on the front step of the newspaper with a posse with a bunch of shotguns, and Mr. Quantrill rode back to Missouri. So those were perilous times. If you wrote an editorial in behalf of abolition, you were bound to find some people that could do you harm, and then vice versa.
Well, I would have liked to have seen that, and B, I think that must have prepared you mentally in your ancestry for a role in politics, obviously.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think that came from my dad. My dad was national chairman under Ike, and while I didn't much care for him being away so much, I did respect him a lot. Maybe some of that, rubbed off on me as well.
All right. Well, you chair the Senate Agricultural Committee, and every 5 years, the committee works on a very important piece of legislation, the Farm Bill. To that end, the committee held hearings across the country and to get feedback from farmers and ranchers and trade associations on that bill. What were the top things you took away from those meetings and hearings?
Well, I think three things real quick. Number one, do not have any severe cuts to crop insurance. Do not endanger the crop insurance program. That's the most important tool in the producer's risk management toolbox, and we are in a rough patch now. I think most everybody knows that. I hope everybody knows that in government, that we're going through a tough time. Secondly, trade. If we are not a reliable supplier and if we do not have a very aggressive trade program or trade policy, we're in trouble. We have our competitors, and they are working hard to replace us in many markets around the world. So we really have to develop a very aggressive trade policy. I am very happy that Bob Lighthizer, who worked for Bob Dole, is on board as our top person with regards to being our trade representative, and we hope to get another young man, Greg Dowd, who has experience with the National Cattlemen and has worked for the Senate Agriculture Committee to also help out. But those two things, crop insurance, trade, you asked for three. I would say it would be government over regulation. We're really working on that very hard to loosen the stranglehold of the federal government over many small businesses and farmers, ranchers, and growers, and everybody connected with them, especially our small community banks as well.
In this environment that you're looking at, low farm prices clearly are such a detriment to the farm incomes. But as you look at the Farm Bill, what do you see are the major challenges to get this thing to the finish line?
Oh, my gosh. Number one, a budget. The House has a 10% cut in agriculture, but they have targeted the SNAP program. I'm not sure something like that would pass the Senate. We have some reforms or some efficiencies to take place all across all of the various programs that we deal with. We have just concluded 9 hearings on all titles in the Farm Bill. There are 11 of them. We combined one hearing. But we ask very good witnesses, not only here, but in Michigan, Kansas. Then I went up to Montana and then down to Alabama, all regions of the country. What's working and what isn't? Mm-hmm. And then how can we do more with less because of the budget restrictions, and that we're trying to make some progress on the deficit and the debt. So I think number one, this is not the time for a revolutionary farm bill. This is a time where farmers want stability and they want predictability. And they would like to have this farm bill sooner than later, and I certainly agree with them.
Farming and food production are inherently risky business activities, but obviously crucial for the country and for consumers. So walk us through, how does the Farm Bill help mitigate, for farmers and ranchers, the risk to food production in the United States?
Well, we have quite a few programs, but basically we have some revenue programs and we have price loss coverage. But again, I would come back to crop insurance. We lost 850,000 acres in a prairie fire out in southwest Kansas. That's largely grass and cattle, but we've also had freezes. Mother Nature hasn't been very kind to anybody here, what with the hurricanes and everything else. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have crop insurance, you won't. I don't know of any ag lender that will, give you the kind of capital you need to keep going. So I would rate that as number one. We have a lot of rural development programs that are of help to our small communities, more especially with broadband and things like that. And the new way in which we farm, which is so terribly dependent on technology, mm-hmm. and then the access that your typical farmer has, depending on the region, to that kind of technology is absolutely essential.
Well, I think that's what's fascinating is due to the low prices for agricultural products, I mean, competition is such a key part of that, and technology or ag tech is playing a fairly large role. I mean, from where you sit, Senator, what do you see are the top technologies that people are adopting, or what are you keeping an eye on in this space? Because I know it's critical for helping farmers.
Well, last Congress, I hosted an ag tech roundtable in Gibson, Kansas. That's a very small community, not very far from Salina, with a number of very good stakeholders to discuss the costs and the benefits of what we call precision technologies and the importance of agriculture data. The top 3 trends I heard then and still believe are at the forefront. First, the constantly evolving types and amount of data farmers can collect on their land. The ag sector has just scratched the surface on utilizing this positive potential that precision agriculture and big data can bring. You can use cameras on UAVs. Farmers can identify pests, deficiency with regards to nutrients, or simply monitor their own livestock without even stepping out of their truck. I even ran a UAV, and the thought occurred to me you wouldn't have to even get in a pickup and your dog to go down to check that that wet spot at the end of the field. I'm not sure that's a good thing. I think we ought to have pickups and dogs. But anyway, second, determining where that data is being stored and who has access to it, because all farm equipment these days has the ability to collect data for farmers to use later on. The question of privacy and data security comes to mind. And then finally, I would say the third trend is who ultimately owns that data. I would say the farmer, but some folks might disagree. If a farmer, for instance, hires a company to collect data and analyze what seed variety or fertilizer application can produce the highest yield, that farmer should have a say as to whether or not that information can be shared or sold to other companies.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. And I think not only in agriculture, but across a whole wide range of products, that data, not only data security, but as you said, who owns that data? That's so critical, because clearly this is going to help the farmer better understand what he's doing. But it's also to some extent business practices, right? So if they're doing something that they find something significant, that's kind of proprietary for the farmer. So I totally understand that. I guess my next question for you would be, since you hail from Kansas and you've represented that state since 1981, both as a congressman and a senator, I mean, you have seen some really big changes for the state and watched it go through that time. What stands out to you?
Well, I think obviously concentration. I think that more especially out west, our farms are getting bigger, but the farm families that farm the land hopefully can stay apace. That farmer and two sons and a daughter, maybe one son stays on the farm, the other one gets into an entirely different job practice or whatever they want to do, but it still can be related to agriculture, and the same for the final one who maybe doesn't want to go into farming personally, but has a related job. So the concentration, I think, is one big issue. But how we farm, my goodness, precision agriculture has changed everything. One of the biggest things that I've seen here just recently, water is going to be one of the biggest issues we face all around the world, but more especially in Kansas, more especially out west. And we've been mining the Ogallala Reservoir for a long time. The Southwest irrigators have tried very hard to minimize that effect, but I went to Israel here about a couple of years ago. They're about 10 years ahead of us with regards to something called drip irrigation.
Sure.
And then in terms of recovery of water to the reservoir, I was talking to Governor Brown back here not too long ago, and they've done some studies to find that recharge can happen a lot faster than people think. If that's the case, that's going to be a very good indication of what we can do down the road to preserve our water supply.
Well, certainly with the fluctuations in weather, that becomes paramount. And I applaud you for going to Israel to learn their drip technology. It's one of the reasons why they've reclaimed parts of the desert out there. So I think it's they've been at the forefront with a lot of agricultural technology, certainly. But let me ask you, before I let you go, one last question. And I know this is so important, but trade is critical for farmers in the U.S. economy. When you met with farmers and ranchers and did your hearings, what did they tell you that they wanted from the current trade negotiations that are happening?
Well, trade always tops the list of concerns for farmers and ranchers all across the country. American agriculture exports are the poster child of what a successful trade agreement should look like. And when there's talk of amending trade agreements or even right now we're calling it renegotiation. I hope we're calling it improvements or modernize as opposed to termination. We don't need that. When there's a lot of talk about amending trade agreements, farmers and ranchers seem to have a unified message: do no harm. And I certainly agree. All of the trade agreements I've been associated with, they've always been over-criticized and they've been oversold. But there is a sweet spot there that you can get to if you really work very hard. The ag industry has built a reputation for being a reliable supplier around the world, and we really need to work hard to maintain that status.
And I think to that end, would they say that from what you're hearing, they were in favor of the TPP then?
Well, I think so, but we don't say that anymore for obvious reasons. I think probably Pacific Rim countries would be, that was the title I at least gave to that area of the world where I think there's a lot of trade opportunities when I had an opportunity to talk with the president.
All right, fair enough. Chairman of the Senate Agricultural Committee and Senator from Kansas, Pat Roberts, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for me this week. Hey, if you got a sec, would you go on iTunes and leave a review for the show? It really helps us here at the CFTC to understand what your thinking is, areas that we could look at for doing additional shows, and it helps other people find the show as well. We'll be back next week with another guest on our quest to learn about the markets we watch. I'm Andy Bush. Thanks for listening. But wait, there's more. Disclaimer time! The CFTC is providing this information as a public service and is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of CFTC policy. Reference to any specific product, service, trademark, manufacturer, or service provider does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the CFTC. The CFTC is not liable to any consumer or third party for any direct, indirect, incidental, consequential, special, or exemplary damages or lost profit related to the use of the information provided or referenced in the podcast. Selection of guests on the podcast does not imply an endorsement of any particular individual or entity. Many individuals and entities provided similar services to those of the guests. The views and opinions expressed by the guest in the podcast are their own and not specifically endorsed by the CFTC. Moreover, the information provided in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Consumers should rely on their own inquiries as to the accuracy and relevance of the information incorporated and referenced in this podcast and assume the entire risk related to its use. The CFTC is providing this interpretation of market trends solely to inform the public of a framework for projecting future outcomes under different scenarios. If you have any questions concerning the meaning or application of a particular law or rule administered by the CFTC, please consult with an attorney.